Every day, Lyra sat by the main square of the colony, her wheelchair floating silently above the smooth pavement. Her long silver hair tied back her eyes, following the people who walked, who ran, who flew on hoverboards. She had been sitting in that same spot since she was 5 now. She was 20 and nothing had changed, not for her, not for her legs, not for her life children. Played near the fountain, sometimes they waved at her, sometimes they asked why she never joined, sometimes they stared. Too long before their parents pulled them away, people passed her like she was part of the background, a quiet statue. With sad eyes and broken dreams, even the medical bots ignored her now. Her case marked as permanent disability in the system. Lyra had stopped hoping a long time ago, stopped dreaming of walking or dancing. She used to believe someone would help her. Maybe a doctor, maybe a genius, but years passed and nothing happened. Her mother had died with guilt in her heart, blaming herself. For Lyra's condition, her father had never returned from the outer mines. She was alone in a crowd full of movement, till one afternoon, something different happened. A man sat beside her, not on a bench, not across the street, but right next to her. His clothes were simple, his hair messy. He looked like he had just come from a workshop. He held a small tool in one hand and a strange metal bird in the other. Without saying anything, he placed the bird on her lap and pressed a button. The wings moved once, then twice. The bird flapped and lifted an inch above her knees. Before falling back down, she looked at him confused, and he smiled. A quiet, gentle smile. "You like birds?" he asked. She shrugged, not knowing what to say. "You've ever seen one fly?" She nodded slowly, then said softly, "Not from this close." He leaned back and looked at the sky. "Me neither, not real ones anyway. But I like making things that try." She picked up the metal bird, examined its joints, its wings, its tiny screws. It was imperfect, but alive in some strange way. "Who made this?" she asked. "I did," he replied, "and I can make better." She laughed a little, her first laugh in months. "You should make legs for me. Then maybe they will try to fly too." He paused, looked at her legs, then said, "Maybe I will." She shook her head. "You cannot fix what is already broken." Leaned forward, his voice calm. "Then maybe it was never broken. Maybe it was just waiting for the right builder." Next day, he came back with another toy, this time a crawling spider. Made of gears and wires, it danced around her chair like it was happy to see her. She smiled again without meaning. He told her his name was Jason. He was a human engineer visiting the colony for a short tech assignment. He said he liked strange puzzles and silent people and things that others gave up on. She told him her name was Lyra and that she had not walked since she was a baby. Because of a genetic nerve failure that no one could fix, he asked if he could scan her legs, and she said yes, not because she believed him, but because for once someone had asked. Someone had cared. He scanned her legs using a portable tool from his belt, then sat beside her and showed her a 3D model of her bones, her nerves, her weak muscles. "This is not impossible," he said, "just hard and expensive and not a priority for most people." She asked, "What about you?" He said, "I never cared much for priorities." That evening he left the colony square and went to the old repair shop near the docks. He looked through piles of junk and leftover bots. He picked up pieces that others had thrown away: rods, actuators, microservos, sensors, broken power cores, everything that might help him do the impossible. Lyra sat in her chair long after the sun set, thinking about birds and legs and people who fix things not because they have to, but because they want to. She looked at the metal bird still sitting on her lap, its wings folded like they were waiting for something to. Jason stood in the middle of the colony's old tech center, surrounded by broken bots, tangled wires, rusty limbs, and forgotten tools. His hands moved fast, his eyes sharp, his mind racing with ideas no one else had tried before. He was not building a weapon, he was not fixing a ship, he was building legs for someone who had never walked, someone who had never been given a chance. People watched him with confusion. A few engineers passed by and shook their heads. Some laughed quietly, Others just stared as if he was wasting time, but Jason kept working. He drew blueprints on the wall with chalk. He tested power cells on dusty benches. He connected wires that sparked with life. He talked to himself sometimes, whispering words like balance, feedback, core strength, and harmony. Lyra sat outside on the grass, her chair still hovering an inch above the ground, the metal bird resting in her lap, now polished and painted blue. She watched Jason through the glass windows, curious about what drove him to do this for her. She had asked once why. He was helping her. He had looked up from his work and said, "Because I can." She did not fully believe him, but his actions kept proving it every day. He came back with something new. A piece of armor, a soft joint, a flexible pad, a shock absorber. He tested them on dummies, then on machines, then on her legs without turning them on, just placing them gently as if asking permission each time. One day he brought a full exosuit leg, built from colony scrap but shaped like it was made for royalty. It was smooth and sleek, strong yet light. He asked if she was ready. She said yes, but her hands trembled. He locked the frame around her legs, then connected the sensors along her spine. His fingers worked fast, but his voice remained calm. "When I activate this, it will feel strange. Your nerves are not used to speaking to your legs, but they will remember if you let them. Just breathe and trust." She nodded, biting her lip, her heart pounding louder than the chair's motor. He pressed the button. A soft hum filled the air. Her legs twitched. She gasped. The pain was not sharp, but deep like muscles waking up from a long dream. Her toes moved, her knees bent, her heels lifted slightly from the chair's footrest. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears forming in her eyes. "You did not tell me it would feel like this." Jason smiled gently. "I did not know it would." The next few days were harder than anything she had ever faced. Jason made her practice every morning, tiny steps between handrails, long hours of learning to shift weight, bend knees, lift feet. Her arms ached, her spine burned, her skin bruised, but she kept going. Sometimes she fell. Jason never rushed to catch her. He waited until she asked for help, then lifted her without judgment, without pity. Sometimes she cried in frustration, shouted at the pain, hated the chair that had held her for years, but every time she stood again, the fire inside her grew stronger. One evening, after hours of training, she sat on the edge of the bench, her legs still in the exosuit frame. Jason handed her a small drink and said, "Today, you walked 3 steps without holding anything." She looked at him, surprised. "I did not even notice." He nodded. That is how progress feels, quiet, but real. Rumors began to spread across the colony about the girl with metal legs built by a human with crazy hands. Some came to watch her practice. Others offered advice. A few tried to talk her out of it, saying it was dangerous, unnatural, against the way things should be. She ignored them. Old Jason told her something once when they sat under the old cargo tower watching the stars. He said, "I do not believe in the way things should be. I believe in the way things could be if we stop being afraid." Lyra remembered those words every time. She stood up every time her legs shook. Every time she took one more step forward, she was not afraid anymore. Not of falling, not of pain, not of people who doubted her. One night she asked Jason what he saw when he looked at her. He paused for a long moment, then said, "I see someone who has always been ready to walk. She just needed legs that listened." She smiled quietly, her eyes reflecting the stars above, then looked down at her new legs, shining softly in the moonlight, and whispered, "I think they are starting to hear me." The next day, Jason came back with grease on his hands and a new fire in his eyes. He said nothing, just showed her a small model of a robotic limb built to match her shape, her size, her movements. He said it was only the beginning. But he would not stop until she walked, until she danced, until she flew. Lyra did not know what to say, but deep inside, something had started to move. Not her legs, not her muscles, but her heart. A hope she thought was long dead was waking up again. For the first time in 15 years, she looked at her future and saw Not a chair, not a wall, not a prison. She saw a path. She saw motion. She saw him. The training chamber echoed with mechanical sounds and soft footsteps as Lyra took one step after another, her arms stretched to keep balance. Her breath uneven, her face shining with sweat, but her eyes full of determination. Jason stood nearby with a control pad, watching every motion, tracking every signal coming from her robotic legs. He had upgraded the sensors the night before, improving how the nerves spoke to the motors. The signals were still weak, but they were clearer now. Each step told a story of struggle and progress. Each step broke the chains that had held her in place for more than 15 years. The first time she stood without support, her legs trembled like leaves in the wind. Her hands reached out to grab something, but she forced them down. She wanted to feel the fear. She wanted to face it, not run from it, because she had never run before, not even once. Jason watched her closely, ready to stop everything if she fell, but she did not fall. She shook, she cried, she screamed. But she did not fall. She looked at him through tears and whispered, "It hurts." He nodded, "Yes, it should. Pain means your body is remembering. Pain means you are waking up." Every morning, she woke up earlier than the sun, dragging herself to the chamber. Before others arrived, she wanted the silence. She wanted the challenge. She wanted to feel herself rise without an audience. Only Jason was allowed to watch. Only he was allowed to witness her rebirth each day. The pain grew sharper, not like injury, but like growth, like muscles screaming for blood, like bones stretching into place. Sometimes her back ached so much, she lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, asking the stars if it was worth it. And every time the answer came not in words, but in motion, because the next morning she could take 2 more steps than the day before. Children began to gather near the training glass, pressing their hands against it, whispering to each other about the girl who once sat still, now moving like the wind. They clapped quietly whenever she completed a walk from one side of the room to the other. She never looked at them, but she heard them, and their hope wrapped around her like armor. Jason kept adjusting the suit, trimming the weight, adding flexibility, building a spine that moved with her instead of against her. He designed a cooling system to stop the joints from overheating. During long sessions, he installed small shock absorbers in the heels to reduce pressure on her hips. He gave everything to that suit, and she gave everything to make it part of her. One afternoon, she tried running. She did not tell Jason. She just leaned forward and let her feet follow the motion. Her legs stumbled, her arms flew sideways, her body twisted, but she did not fall, not until the last step, when her foot caught the edge of the mat and she landed hard on her shoulder. Jason rushed to her side, but she laughed, not a weak laugh, not a nervous laugh, but a full, deep laugh that echoed across the chamber. "Ran," she said. "I ran like a storm, even if just for 5 seconds." Jason smiled and helped her up. "You ran like thunder." That she slept without dreaming, her body too tired, her mind too full of real moments to need imaginary ones. Her legs pulsed gently with heat from the built-in muscles designed by Jason, each pulse like a heartbeat, reminding her she was no longer just a watcher of life. When she woke up the next morning, her legs felt different. Not just the suit, but something inside her. Something old, something hidden deep in the nerves. Maybe it was strength, maybe it was memory, maybe it was belief. Whatever it was, it whispered to her that she was more than metal, more than circuits, more than wires. Jason met her at the chamber entrance, holding a new set of balance tools. "Today, we train on uneven surfaces," he said. Her face lit up with surprise, then joy. "Really?" He nodded and smiled. "You are ready." She stepped onto the uneven mat, wobbled and corrected herself, then took a step forward. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but with purpose, and every time her foot touched the ground, it left behind something powerful, something ancient, something proud. By the end of the session, she could walk across without falling, her arms no longer stretched out, her spine straighter, her breath steady. She looked at Jason and said, "I feel alive," he answered. "You were always alive. Now, you are also free." She picked up the small metal bird from her bag, the one he had given her in the beginning. She held it gently and whispered, "I think it is time to teach this one how to fly to the." Colony Board building stood tall in the center of the civic dome, its walls clean, its halls silent, its rooms cold with rules and documents and decisions that shaped lives. Without ever touching hearts, Lyra stood just outside the main chamber, her robotic legs humming gently beneath her long coat, her hands clenched by her side, her breath slow but uneven. She had faced pain, she had faced failure, but this was something new. Jason stood beside her, holding a small briefcase filled with scans, blueprints, reports, and proof the suit was safe, the signals were stable. The risk was low, but facts were not always enough, especially not in rooms where old minds feared new things. They called her case controversial. They used words like unauthorized, unregulated, unprecedented. They said the technology was illegal because it bypassed standard procedures, because it used custom code, because it was made by one human for one alien with no corporate backing and no colony license. A robotic voice called her name. The door slid open. The board members sat in high seats above a circular room. Faces, stern eyes, distant. Jason walked forward and placed the data crystal on the reader. The screen lit up with models of the exosuit, its parts, its functions, its safety readings. Lyra followed and stood at the center of the circle, her hands shaking but her legs steady. The lead counselor spoke. "Your case has drawn attention from multiple sectors. We must determine if this system you are using is safe for both the user and the community." Jason responded with calm confidence, explaining every detail, every adjustment, every improvement. He showed videos of her training, results of her scans, live graphs of her muscle response. He ended with a simple sentence: "She is not a threat, she is a miracle." Board members whispered among themselves, then asked Lyra to speak. She froze for a moment, then stepped forward. Her voice soft but clear. "For 15 years I could not move. I watched life from a chair. I listened to people say my condition was permanent. I accepted silence as my future, until someone saw something different." She paused, then continued, "This suit gave me a second life, not just to walk, but to feel, not just to stand, but to become what I was meant to be. It is not a weapon. It is not a danger. It is not a danger. It is my freedom." The lead counselor asked, "What if the system fails and injures you? What if others try to copy it and fail? What if this becomes a new wave of untested hope, leading to more suffering?" Lyra looked up, her eyes bright with something that silenced the room. "Everything in life carries risk. Even standing without legs was dangerous. I chose this risk, and I would choose it again, even if it breaks, even if it ends, because at least I stood once on my own." Few counselors looked away. Some folded their hands, others stared at the floor. Then the lead counselor spoke again. "The board has decided, due to the unregulated nature of this technology and the absence of formal approval, we cannot permit continued use until full trials are conducted. The suit must be surrendered within 24 hours. Words hit like a stone. Lyra took a step back, her face pale, her hands clenched. Jason moved forward to protest, but she stopped him with a small shake of her head. Tears filled her eyes, but she stood tall then. Without asking, she did something no one expected. She removed the coat, revealing the full frame of her robotic legs glowing softly with blue lights. She looked around the room and said, "You want me to give this up? Then watch what you are taking." She stepped forward, then backward, then turned, then knelt, then stood again. Every motion smooth, every joint controlled, every movement proof of what she had become. Without permission, without approval, but not without purpose. She raised her voice and said, "If you take this from me, you are not protecting me, you are breaking me." The silence that followed was long. Then a sound came from the back of the room. A woman stood up, dressed in white, with the badge of the Medical Ethics Division. She walked forward and said, "I request emergency override. I will sponsor her for clinical trial." Status effective immediately, the board hesitated, but the lead counselor nodded request. Granted temporary use permitted under supervision until further evaluation. Lyra's knees gave out, but Jason caught her before she fell. She did not cry loudly. She just leaned into him, whispering thank you over and over again later. Outside the building, under the soft light of the dome sky, Jason handed her a small piece of chocolate. She took it and laughed between quiet sobs. "You think this means I passed?" He smiled and said, "You passed the moment you stepped into that room." The storm began without warning, a sharp pulse. Through the colony's energy core, a tremor that shook every wall and silenced every screen then came. The alarm, loud and urgent, flashing across the sky domes, a message repeated over and over: power. Grid failure, Sector 3 emergency lockdown initiated, all residents must remain. Shelter Jason stood outside the engineering bay, his tablet shaking in his hands. His eyes fixed on the live feed from the education dome, 3 children still inside. Trapped behind a magnetic barrier now sealed by the system's panic response. No staff nearby, no rescue team fast enough, no manual override from outside the core. Lyra arrived moments later, her robotic legs clicking softly with every step, her hair pulled back, her eyes scanning the display as Jason explained the situation. She stared at the dome camera, 3 young aliens crying in fear, banging on the sealed door the power surge had fried the emergency exit circuits. No one could get in, and no one could get out. The board had delayed her trial training due to the recent ruling. Her use of the exosuit still under temporary review. She was supposed to stay in observation, stay under watch, stay safe, but safety had never been her goal. She looked at Jason and asked how long before the backup grid fails. He answered less than 10 minutes. After that, the dome collapses to prevent overload. She did not ask permission. She did not wait for orders. She stepped back, adjusted her suit, tightened the joint seals, activated the emergency stabilization mode. Jason tried to stop her, reminded her of the risk, reminded her of the suspension, reminded her that if she entered the high-voltage zone, the suit might shut down, or worse, she might never walk again. She looked at him and said, "I already lost 15 years. I will not lose 3 more lives without another word." She ran toward the dome faster than she had ever moved before, her feet pounding against the ground, her body leaning into the wind, her breath steady, her hands ready. The storm above cracked with lightning. The ground beneath her shook again as the secondary grid screamed under pressure. Security bots shouted for her to stop. Automated systems tried to divert her path, but she moved like a force of nature, every part of her suit glowing with power, every step writing history across the ground. She reached the emergency hatch near the dome's lower side and connected her neural link to the access port, bypassing the 2 lock using her suit's interface. Jason watched from the control tower, his hands gripping the rail, his heart racing faster than the colony's main processor. He whispered to the air, "You better come back, because I am not building another you inside." The dome, the heat was rising, wires, sparking smoke filling the air. Lyra crawled through a narrow maintenance tunnel, her body pressed against hot metal, her arms guiding her legs. Following with smooth control, she reached the inner panel and forced it open, dropping into the main room just as the children turned toward the noise. They saw her not as a stranger, but as a miracle, her body covered in sparks, her legs pulsing with light. She held out her arms and said, "Follow me." The floor shook as the grid reached final surge countdown. They had maybe 60 seconds left, maybe less. She led them back through the tunnel, shielding them from falling debris. Her body taking each hit, her frame holding strong. The final panel jammed, but she forced it open with raw strength, lifting it with both arms, her joints straining but never breaking. One by one, the children crawled out. Jason met them at the edge, pulling them to safety, then turned to see her still inside, stuck halfway, crushed between the hatch and the wall, the heat now burning through the outer shell of her frame. He shouted for help, but no one moved fast enough, so he ran to her, reached in, grabbed. Her hand pulled with everything he had. She screamed not in fear, but in effort. Her hand slipping, her fingers locking with his one final surge, and she was free-falling into his arms as the dome behind them sealed and collapsed in a burst of light. They rolled onto the ground, gasping, covered in smoke alarms, blaring crowd gathering. Medics rushing. Lyra coughed once, then smiled, her voice broken but proud. "I think I just passed the trial, though." Next day, the entire colony watched the footage, her dash through the storm. Her rescue, her fall and rise again. No more debate, no more delay. The board approved her system with full honors. The medical council called it a breakthrough. The people called it something else. They called her the girl who ran into the storm. Jason stood beside her as she received her recognition, but she held the medal for only a moment, then gave it to the children she had saved, telling them this belongs to those who believed. I couldn't. From that day forward, no one ever called her disabled again. They called her what she truly was, a hero with legs. Made not of steel but of courage, the air was still across the quiet meadow, where the grass grew soft and golden and the wind whispered through the tall blue trees. Lyra stood alone at the top of the small hill, her back straight, her eyes closed. Her hands gently holding a folded scarf, once worn by her mother. A scarf now faded, but filled with memories she had never spoken aloud. Had been exactly 1 year since the storm, 1 year since she had walked into fire and pulled life out of danger. 1 year since the colony stopped seeing her as broken and started seeing her as brave, yet on this day she asked for no audience, no ceremony. No applause, she asked only for silence and the open sky, because this day did not belong to her. This day belonged to the woman who gave her love before she ever gave her legs. Jason had offered to join, but she gently declined, saying this part she had to do alone. She had prepared for weeks, studying old dances from her species, dances her mother used to perform before illness and grief had taken away all light from their small home. She had watched ancient recordings, traced every movement in the air with her hands, then her arms, then her feet. She had fallen more than once during practice, scraped her knees, twisted her ankles, overheated the motors, but never stopped, not because the movements were perfect, but because the meaning behind them was sacred. Every spin, every step, every pause told a story of love, a story of grief, a story of letting go and holding on. Now she opened her eyes and looked at the small hollow projector resting at the base of the hill. It glowed softly, showing the only existing photo of her mother and herself, taken when she was just a baby, before the chair, before the doctors, before the quiet settled into their home like dust. Her mother had a tired smile in the photo, her arms wrapped tight around Lyra, as if protecting her from a future they both could feel, but never outrun. Lyra stepped forward, her robotic legs adjusting to the uneven ground, the lights within them dimmed to a soft silver hum. She raised her arms and let the wind guide her first movement, a simple bend, a slow twist, a turn that caught the sunlight and scattered it like gold. She moved with care, not like a machine, but like water, not like someone proving strength, but like someone remembering love. Each motion carved a path in the grass, each beat in her chest echoed with emotion she had never let out until now. Her arms reached toward the stars, her feet lifted and landed like whispers. Her body told a story without a single word. Her eyes never left the sky, as if her mother might be watching from somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the stars, beyond time. The wind picked up and carried the scarf from her hands, letting it fly across the field like a bird once caged. Now free, it danced with her, moving in rhythm, moving in spirit, moving as if alive. Lyra smiled through tears, letting the moment wash over her, letting the silence speak louder than any voice. Jason watched from a distance, just beyond the tree line, not close enough to disturb her, not far enough to miss what she had become. His eyes followed her every motion. His hands clutched a small data chip containing the final update he had made to her suit, an upgrade she never asked for, but one he had added. Just in case, one that let the system move with her emotions, not just commands, when the dance ended. Lyra knelt in the grass, breathing hard, heartful. She picked up the scarf now resting near her feet and kissed it gently, her voice barely a whisper but full of truth. "I did it, Mom. I kept going. I kept my promise, and I think I am okay now." She stood again and turned slowly toward the colony lights glowing. In the distance, her future waiting, her story still being written, but her past finally at peace. Her feet moved with strength, her steps silent but proud, the suit responding. Not as a tool, but as a part of her, as natural as her breath, as loyal as her memories. Jason walked to meet her, offering a bottle of water, and a quiet nod. She took it and smiled, then said softly, "I do not think this was just a dance. I think it was a goodbye." Jason nodded. Maybe it was also a beginning. She looked back at the hill one last time, then walked forward, not with fear, not with pain, but with the kind of joy that only comes when you stop surviving and start living. And for the first time since she could remember, the stars above looked not like distant dreams, but like open doors. The sun rose slowly over the quiet edges of the colony, casting golden light on the rooftops and glass domes and green fields that stretched like open arms toward the future. Lyra stood in front of the new training center, her hands behind her back, her eyes watching the students arrive one by one, children of every kind, some with crutches, some with wheelchairs, some with cybernetic arms, and some with eyes that glowed from old surgeries. They'd come from every corner of the galaxy, drawn by a name that once belonged to a silent girl who sat alone and unseen, drawn by a story they had heard through whispers and signals and shared recordings, a story about movement and pain and courage and hope. They came not to be fixed, but to be seen and to be understood. Lyra greeted them with a smile that held no pity, only respect and kindness and belief. She helped them into the classrooms. She showed them the labs, she introduced the staff, and she led the first session herself, standing tall in the center of the motion chamber, where every wall was lined with training rails and padded floors and inspiration. She looked at the students and said, "I spent most of my life thinking I was less than others, that I was meant to sit still and watch others live, that I was born broken and would always be that way. Then one person saw something different in me, not because I asked, not because I begged, but because he believed that machines are not just for function, they are for freedom and dreams and everything that makes us alive." The students listened, not with silence, but with stillness, the kind that means something is changing inside, the kind that holds every word in place like treasure. They watched as she stepped back and opened a storage chamber where the first student's suit stood waiting. Built by her own hands, using Jason's blueprints, using new tech, using new hope. She helped the first girl put it on piece by piece, knee by knee, strap by strap. Then she held her hand and said softly, "We are going to walk together, not because you must, but because you can, if you are ready." And the girl nodded, with eyes wide and heart open. As they moved forward, the suit clicked and whirred and adjusted and balanced. The girl took one step, then another, then stumbled, then stood again, then laughed, then cried, not because high was easy, but because it was real. The class clapped and cheered, and some shouted words of joy and others wiped tears without shame. Jason watched from the upper level, leaning against the glass, arms crossed, face quiet, his hair now grayer, his hands now slower, but his mind still alive with motion. He had stepped back, letting Lyra take the lead, letting her build what he had once only dreamed, letting her teach others what she had taught herself through pain and fire and love. Later that evening, when the classes were done and the students had gone to rest, Lyra walked outside to the garden, where Jason sat alone, watching the stars. She sat beside him and handed him a small box made of wood carved with her initials and his. He opened it and found the metal bird he had given her all those years ago, now polished and fitted with new wings. She said, "I upgraded it. Now it flies higher than before." And he smiled then, said like you, and she laughed, then nodded yes, like me, and like them, and like every person. Whoever thought they were only meant to watch the sky, they sat in silence for a while, not needing words. Just breathing, just being, until. Jason looked at her and asked, "What will you build next?" And she answered, "I want to build a system that listens to emotions, not commands, something that learns from the user, not the manual. Something that knows when someone is scared and helps them. Stand anyway, something that carries dreams, not just bodies." Looked at her and said, "Then we will build it together again one more time." And she nodded, her eyes shining with new light as the stars blinked above and the wind moved through the soft leaves and the garden lights began to fade. She stood and turned to go, then paused and looked back, her voice soft but strong. "I used to think my story ended when I stood up for the first time, but now I know that was only the prologue. The real story begins when you use your strength to lift others and let them rise." She walked away, her steps smooth and graceful, her heart full, her purpose clear, and somewhere in the sky above the colony, a small metal bird flapped its wings and flew into the stars, carrying not just code and gears, but the dreams of a girl who once sat still and imagined a life worth chasing.